Welcome to part 2 on our lecture on backward design.
Now that we have introduced you to the foundations of this course design framework, we will now review common mistakes to avoid when determining learning objectives, creating assessments, and communicating feedback.
What should students know, understand, and be able to do? Course learning objectives help focus our planning and guide purposeful action towards intended results. Learning objectives benefit both instructors and students. For instructors, they guide course design decisions. They help determine the types of assessments or acceptable evidence of student learning, and they help organize course content and determine instructional strategies. For students, course learning objectives provide a roadmap, manage expectations, and help to focus their efforts and monitor their progress through assessments. Drafting learning objectives should not just be a list of content that students will learn in a course. In certain instances, objectives may not be achievable given the level and time frame of the course, or they may be too vague and not measurable.
Additionally, in the common content-centered approach, assessment is an afterthought. Since grades need to be assigned, an instructor may default to using traditional formal assessments, like a midterm, a second exam, or paper, and a final exam. Students may achieve the desired results of the learning objectives, but more by luck than design. Assessments are crucial to keep students on track to complete the determined learning objectives. Mistakes when forming an assessment approach may include the assumptions that everything assessed must be graded, and a high-stakes exam is needed for evidence gathering when assessments do not align with objectives. For instance, a final exam consisting exclusively of 100 multiple-choice questions for a syllabus in which primary sources are stressed as important should not be given. Having covered these mistakes, let's now articulate our learning objectives.
Consider the idea, concepts, and skill priorities for your course. What key information and ideas are important for students to understand in your course? What kinds of thinking are important for students to learn? What important skills do students need to gain? There is a universe of possible content. However, it cannot all be addressed in a course or a unit of study. Our focus will be on what is important to know and do. What transferable knowledge and skills do our students need? Ultimately, we want to identify the big ideas and core tasks that anchor the course. Drilling down to this core helps identify our priorities for teaching and learning. It should also be clear what exactly we are looking for when assessing student work. I'll know it when I see it does not help students and does not ensure grading consistency. The question we should ask is, what specific characteristics in students' work determine if the desired results or learning objectives were achieved? Once the criteria have been identified, share them with your learners.
Learning objectives should be student-centered, focusing on what learners will be able to do. Learning objectives should be specific, outlining the knowledge students will acquire. This guides the selection of assessment, providing evidence that the learning objectives have been achieved. Finally, the learning objectives should be achievable within the course context and duration. Learning objectives commonly proceed with the sentence stem, "By the end of the course, students will be able to..."
Objectives always contain action verbs. We can use Bloom's taxonomy to help us select desired learning objectives. Ask yourself, can students recognize, recall, or retrieve knowledge from long-term memory? Action verbs that can be put in the course objectives include define, identify, list, or repeat. Can students construct meaning from what they've been taught? Action verbs include classify, discuss, explain, identify, or summarize. Can students carry out or use a procedure in each situation? Action verbs include determine, execute, illustrate, or implement. Can students break material into its component parts and determine how the parts relate to one another and to an overall structure or purpose? Action verbs include differentiate, organize, compare, contrast. Can students make judgments based on criteria and standards? Action verbs include support, critique, defend, measure, or prove. Can students put elements together to form coherent or functional whole action? Action verbs include construct, design, formulate, plan.
How do we design an assessment approach that enhances student learning and informs teaching? The answer? Use a variety of methods and formats. It is recommended that the instructors gather evidence throughout a course, not just relying on a single culminating performance task at the middle or end. Lastly, create opportunities for students to be involved in assessment and self-assessment of their work or performance. Forward-looking assessments have students applying their knowledge in authentic ways. That is, getting students to do the discipline or real-world tasks. This simulates a student's knowledge and skills in real-world situations and forces a professor to ask, in what kind of situation will students need to apply their course knowledge and skills? Examples of forward-looking assessments include projects, exhibitions, portfolios, and may involve students solving real-world problems or conducting scientific research.
Integrating more feedback opportunities throughout a course will help students learn. Ideally, feedback should be frequent, timely, and make clear what students need to do to improve. Learning is maximized when a cycle of feedback is introduced. This cycle includes feedback, revision, performance, which guides the production of known high-quality outcomes. For this to happen, we must build these cycles into our assessment design.
We hope you leave this video feeling more confident about designing and leading your digital education course.
We can't wait to see what you and your students accomplish together.